The stench of whiskey and gunpowder hung in the air as Zara O'Malley pressed her face against the rough-hewn floorboards of her family's cabin, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Outside, her father's voice rose in fury, followed by the sharp report of a revolver that echoed through the Montana night. She'd been born into a family of outlaws, but tonight was different. Tonight, blood would stain the threshold of the only home she'd ever known. "Zara, get your things. Now." Her mother's urgent whisper cut through the darkness as she thrust a small satchel into Zara's trembling hands. At 20 years old, Zara had witnessed plenty of her family's misdeeds, but the panic in her mother's eyes told her this was no ordinary trouble. The O'Malleys had finally crossed a line they couldn't uncross. "What's happening?" Zara asked, though she already knew the answer deep in her bones. "They found us. Marshall's men, your father." Her mother's voice cracked. "There's no time, we ride within the hour." The year was 1876, and the West was still wild enough for a family to disappear if they knew the right trails and had enough determination. The O'Malleys had both in spades. What they lacked was honor, a fact that had haunted Zara since she'd been old enough to understand that most families didn't rob stage coaches or hold up banks for a living. Within the hour, the O'Malleys, what remained of them, were riding hard toward the Montana-Idaho border. Zara's older brother Sean had taken a bullet in the shoulder, and her father was nowhere to be seen. No one spoke of him, which told Zara everything she needed to know. Her younger sister Meredith rode silently beside her, tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face. "Where are we going?" Zara finally dared to ask as dawn broke over the distant mountains. Her uncle Patrick, now apparently the head of the family, glanced back at her with cold eyes. "There's a place. Your pa and I found it years back, remote, safe, no one will look for us there." "And then what?" Zara pressed, earning a sharp look from her mother. "Then we do what O'Malleys have always done," Patrick said. "We survive, but survival, as Zara would soon learn, came at a steep price." The safe place turned out to be an abandoned mining settlement nestled in a narrow canyon. The decrepit structures looked as though they'd collapse in a strong wind, and the lingering smell of rot and decay turned Zara's stomach. But it was defensible, with only one way in and one way out and far from any established trails. "Home, sweet home," Patrick declared, dismounting his lathered horse. That first night, huddled around a small fire in what must have once been the mining office, Patrick laid out the rules. "From now on, we're the Johnson family, traveling merchants who lost our wagon in a flash flood. We're looking to rebuild." He fixed each of them with a hard stare, and most importantly, no one shows their face to strangers, not ever. "What do you mean?" Meredith asked, her voice small in the firelit darkness. Patrick reached into his saddlebag and pulled out several crude masks made of burlap. "I mean exactly what I say. We cover our faces when we go into town, all of us. The marshal has descriptions, wanted posters, they'll be looking." "This is madness," Zara muttered, earning a slap from her mother that echoed in the empty building. "This is survival," her mother hissed. "Your father died tonight because someone recognized his face. Is that what you want for the rest of us?" Zara rubbed her stinging cheek and said nothing. But deep inside, something hardened. This wasn't living, it was existing in a perpetual state of fear. And for what? To continue the family's legacy of thievery and violence. The weeks that followed settled into a grim routine. Patrick and Sean would ride out, returning with supplies and occasionally money that Zara knew they hadn't earned honestly. Her mother and aunt tended to the daily needs of their makeshift home, while Zara and Meredith were tasked with various chores, always under the watchful eyes of family members who seemed increasingly paranoid. True to Patrick's decree, whenever anyone ventured to the small town of Pinecrest, some 15 miles from their hiding place, they wore the burlap masks. They claimed to be burn victims from a wagon accident, a story that elicited pity rather than suspicion from the townsfolk. Zara hated it. She hated the scratchy burlap against her skin, the way it restricted her breathing, and most of all, the barrier it created between her and the world. She'd never been free exactly, but now she felt like a prisoner in her own life. One sweltering August afternoon, as Zara was gathering water from the stream that ran through their canyon, she heard the unmistakable sound of hooves on stone. Freezing in place, she realized with horror that she wasn't wearing her mask it hung from her belt where she'd placed it after the heat had become unbearable. Ducking behind a large boulder, she peered cautiously around its edge. A lone rider approached on a magnificent chestnut stallion, moving slowly as though in no particular hurry. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes that seemed to catch every movement around him. A cowboy, by the look of his attire and the easy way he sat his horse. Zara should have run. She should have hidden her face and slipped away unnoticed, but something kept her rooted to the spot, watching as the stranger dismounted and led his horse to the water. "You can come out now," he called, not looking in her direction but somehow knowing she was there. "I mean you no harm." Zara's heart leaped into her throat. She remained silent, hoping he'd give up and leave. "Suit yourself," he said with a shrug. "But it's mighty suspicious. A person hiding in these parts makes a man wonder what they might be hiding from." "I'm not hiding," Zara finally replied, still keeping the boulder between them. "I'm collecting water." The cowboy laughed, a warm, genuine sound that seemed to chase away the oppressive heat. "Well, you're doing a mighty poor job of it, seeing as your bucket is over here and you're over there." Zara cursed silently. In her haste to hide, she'd left her wooden bucket at the stream's edge. "Look," the cowboy continued, his voice softening, "I'm just passing through, tracking some strays from the Double R Ranch. Name's Darion Reed, and you are." "No one important," Zara replied, even as her mind registered that the Double R was one of the largest cattle operations in the territory. "Everyone's important to someone," Darion countered, "but I respect your privacy. Mind if I water my horse before moving on?" "It's a free country," Zara said, immediately regretting the tinge of bitterness in her voice. Darion raised an eyebrow but said nothing as he removed his hat and splashed water on his face. In the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees, Zara could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 25 or so, with a clean-shaven face unmarked by the hardness she was accustomed to seeing in men's features. "Beautiful country," he remarked, glancing around at the canyon walls rising above them. "Tough place to live, though. You got family nearby?" Alarm bells rang in Zara's head. "I should go," she said, starting to back away. "Wait," Darion called, and something in his tone made her pause. "Your bucket." He held it out, having filled it with clear stream water. After a moment's hesitation, Zara stepped from behind the boulder, keeping her face angled away as she approached. She reached for the bucket, but Darion didn't immediately release it. "Look at me," he said gently. "Please." Against every instinct honed by years of family loyalty and fear, Zara raised her eyes to his. What she saw there wasn't suspicion or threat, but genuine curiosity and something else she couldn't quite name. "Thank you," she said, taking the bucket and quickly looking away. "You have kind eyes," Darion observed, "too kind for someone who hides in canyons." Before Zara could formulate a response, a shout echoed from further up the canyon. "Zara, where are you, girl?" Panic flared in her chest. "I have to go," she whispered urgently. "Please don't tell anyone you saw me." Darion's expression grew serious. "Are you in trouble? Because if you are, no," Zara cut him off. "Just, please, forget you saw me." Without waiting for his response, she fled up the path, water sloshing from the bucket as she ran. Behind her, she could feel Darion's eyes following her retreat, and for reasons she couldn't explain, the thought sent a strange warmth through her veins. "Where were you?" Patrick demanded when she returned to camp, his eyes narrowing at her flushed face. "The stream," Zara replied, setting down the bucket. "It's hotter than usual today." "Where's your mask?" her mother asked sharply. Zara touched her face, feigning surprise, though the mask still hung from her belt. "I must have forgotten to put it back on after washing my face." There was no one around. Patrick studied her for a long moment, then grunted. "Don't let it happen again. Sean saw a rider in the canyon, could be trouble." Zara's stomach twisted with guilt and fear. "A rider? Did he come this way?" "No, headed west after watering his horse." Patrick spat on the ground. "Probably just a cowhand from one of the ranches. Still, we'll keep watch tonight." That night, as her family slept, Zara lay awake staring at the ceiling of the dilapidated structure they called home. Darion Reed's face kept appearing in her mind, his easy smile, the genuine concern in his eyes when he thought she might be in trouble. She couldn't remember the last time someone outside her family had looked at her that way, like she mattered as an individual rather than as an O'Malley. She told herself it was foolish to dwell on a chance encounter with a stranger. She would never see him again, and that was for the best. The O'Malleys, or Johnsons, as they now called themselves, couldn't afford connections to the outside world. Connections meant risk, and risk meant discovery. Yet as she finally drifted into sleep, Zara found herself hoping that Darion Reed might pass through their canyon again. 2 weeks later, Zara's wish came true, though not in the way she'd imagined. Patrick had sent her and Meredith into Pinecrest for supplies, their faces hidden behind the hated burlap masks. They'd nearly completed their errands when a commotion erupted outside the general store. "Cattle rustlers," someone shouted. "They hit the double R last night." Zara's blood ran cold as she exchanged glances with Meredith. They both knew what this meant. Patrick and Sean had gone out the previous night and returned before dawn with extra horses and satisfied grins. Zara had assumed they'd stolen the horses from travelers, not a powerful outfit like the Double R. "They say it was a family of outlaws," the store owner was telling his customers. "The O'Malleys thought they'd moved on from these parts, but apparently not." "We need to go," Meredith whispered urgently. Now, they were nearly to their horses when a familiar voice stopped Zara in her tracks. "Miss Johnson, isn't it?" Darion Reed stood before them, looking trail-worn and grim. His eyes, which Zara remembered as warm and inviting, now held a steely determination. "Mr. Reed," she acknowledged, grateful for the mask that hid her expression. "We were just leaving." "I bet you were." His tone was cooler than she remembered. "Funny thing about those rustlers. They left tracks heading east into that canyon where I met a young woman gathering water, woman who seemed mighty anxious not to be seen." Meredith tugged at Zara's sleeve. "We need to go," she repeated, louder this time. Darion's gaze shifted between them. 2 women in masks. "Just like the descriptions we got from a traveler who was robbed last month by a family wearing burlap over their faces." He took a step closer. "I don't believe in coincidences, Miss Johnson, or whatever your name really is. You're making a mistake," Zara said, her voice steadier than she felt. "We're just simple folk trying to rebuild after losing everything." "Then you won't mind coming to speak with Marshal Thornton," Darion replied. "He's very interested in your family's story." Meredith reacted first, bolting for her horse with a speed born of desperation. Zara hesitated only a moment before following, but that moment cost her. Darion's hand closed around her wrist, firm but not painful. "Don't," he said, his voice low. "You run now and there's no coming back from it." Around them, people were beginning to notice the confrontation. Zara could feel curious eyes on them, hear the murmurs spreading through the small crowd. "You don't understand," she whispered fiercely. "They'll kill me if they think I betrayed them." Something flickered in Darion's eyes, doubt, perhaps, or concern, but he didn't release her. "Who? Who will kill you?" But Zara never got to answer. A shot rang out from somewhere down the street and chaos erupted. People screamed and scattered, diving for cover as more gunfire followed. In the confusion, Zara wrenched free from Darion's grasp and ran for her horse. She was halfway into the saddle when she heard Darion cry out. Turning, she saw him stagger backward, clutching his arm where a dark stain was spreading across his shirt sleeve. Without thinking, she slid back down and ran to his side. "Are you hit badly?" she asked, helping him to cover behind a water trough. "Just a graze," he grimaced. "But it seems your family doesn't take kindly to conversation." Zara peered around the trough and spotted Patrick atop his horse at the far end of the street, rifle in hand. Their eyes met briefly before he wheeled his mount around and galloped away. "That wasn't for you," she realized aloud. "He was aiming at me." Darion's expression hardened. "And why would your own kin shoot at you?" "Because I broke the rules. I'm talking to you, Zara reached up and pulled the mask from her face, letting it fall to the dusty ground. "I showed my face." For a long moment, Darion simply stared at her, his eyes widening slightly. Whatever he'd expected to find beneath the mask, it clearly wasn't the woman before him. Zara knew she wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense. Her nose had been broken once and healed slightly crooked, and years of sun had freckled her fair skin, but there was something in his gaze that made her feel suddenly vulnerable. "You need to go," she said, breaking the silence. "He'll come back with the others, and leave you to face them alone, not likely." Darion checked his revolver, wincing as the movement pulled at his injured arm. "You don't understand, this isn't your fight." "Maybe not," he conceded, "but I'm making it mine." No one deserves to live in fear of their own family. The sound of approaching hooves ended their discussion. Darion pulled Zara closer to the protection of the trough as 4 riders thundered into the street. "Zara," Patrick's voice boomed. "Show yourself, girl, and maybe we'll let your little cowboy friend live." Zara closed her eyes briefly, steeling herself. "He'll kill us both," she whispered. "Not if I can help it," Darion replied. "Listen, the marshal and his deputies are on the way. I just need to keep you alive until they get here." "And how do you propose to do that against 4 armed men?" A small, confident smile played at the corners of Darion's mouth. "I didn't spend 5 years with the Texas Rangers without learning a few tricks." He handed her his spare revolver. "You know how to use this." Zara checked the chambers and nodded grimly. "I'm an O'Malley. I was shooting before I could properly write my name." Something like respect flickered in Darion's eyes. "Then follow my lead." What followed was the longest 15 minutes of Zara's life. Patrick and his men had them pinned behind the water trough, bullets splintering the wood around them as they returned fire only when absolutely necessary, conserving their ammunition. "They're trying to flank us," Darion muttered, nodding toward movement at the edge of a nearby building. "That'll be Sean," Zara confirmed. "He's always been good at getting behind people." Darion's expression was grim. "I need to draw their fire. When I do, you make for that alleyway." He pointed to a narrow passage between the general store and the barber shop. "And leave you here?" "No, Zara." The sound of her name on his lips sent an unexpected shiver through her. "Trust me, please." Perhaps it was the earnestness in his eyes, or perhaps it was the simple fact that no one had asked for her trust in years, they'd only demanded her obedience. Whatever the reason, Zara found herself nodding. "On my signal," Darion said, checking his ammunition one last time. "Ready?" Zara took a deep breath. "Ready." Darion suddenly rose up, firing rapidly toward Patrick and the others. "Now," he shouted, and Zara bolted for the alleyway. She was halfway there when a bullet kicked up just inches from her feet. Spinning, she saw Sean emerging from between 2 buildings, his rifle leveled at her chest. "Nothing personal, sister," he called, his finger tightening on the trigger. The shot that rang out came not from Sean's rifle, but from somewhere behind Zara. Sean's expression shifted from cruel determination to surprise as he dropped his weapon and clutched at his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. Darion stood in the street, his smoking gun still pointed at Sean. "Move, Zara," he shouted. She didn't need to be told twice. Reaching the alleyway, she pressed herself against the wall, heart pounding. Darion backed toward her position, still firing at Patrick and the others who had taken cover behind a wagon. "You can't run forever, Zara." Patrick's voice echoed down the street. "Your blood, you belong with us." "Blood doesn't make family," she shouted back, surprised at her own defiance. "Not the kind that matters." A fresh volley of gunfire was their only answer. Darion reached the alley and grabbed Zara's hand. "This way," he said, pulling her deeper into the narrow passage. They emerged behind the buildings and made their way through backyards and between structures, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter. Just when Zara thought they might have escaped, they rounded a corner and found themselves face to face with her mother. Elizabeth O'Malley stood perfectly still, a double-barreled shotgun in her hands pointed directly at Darion's chest. Her eyes, so like Zara's own, were cold and unreadable. "Step away from my daughter," she commanded. Darion slowly raised his hands but didn't move from Zara's side. "Mrs. O'Malley, I presume." "Mother," Zara pleaded, "please, this has to end." "It will," Elizabeth agreed, her grip on the shotgun unwavering. "When you come home where you belong." "That place was never home," Zara said, surprised by the steadiness of her voice. "Just a prison." Something flickered in her mother's eyes, pain, perhaps, or recognition. "We did what we had to do to survive." "No," Zara countered. "We did what Pa and Patrick wanted. There were always other choices." For a long moment, Elizabeth said nothing. Then, almost imperceptibly, her grip on the shotgun loosened. You're just like him, your real father. Zara's world seemed to tilt on its axis. What? Elizabeth's laugh was bitter. You think Cormac O'Malley could have sired a child with your spirit, your conscience? No. Your real father was a man I loved before I made the mistake of running off with Cormac. A good man, honest. Why are you telling me this now? Because I've watched you fight against what we are your whole life. Elizabeth lowered the shotgun slightly. And because I'm tired, Zara, so tired. The sound of distant gunfire cut through their conversation. Elizabeth's head snapped up. That'll be the marshal and his men. Patrick won't go quietly. Come with us, Zara urged. Testify against them. Start over. Elizabeth shook her head sadly. It's too late for me, but not for you. She stepped aside, clearing their path. Go, live the life I should have chosen. Mother, go. Elizabeth raised the shotgun again, though Zara could see the tremble in her hands. Before I change my mind, Darion gently took Zara's arm. Come on, he murmured. We need to get clear. Tears streaming down her face, Zara allowed him to lead her away, though her eyes remained fixed on her mother until they turned a corner and she disappeared from view. They found horses at the livery stable and rode hard out of town, heading north away from the canyon hideout. Neither spoke until they'd put several miles between themselves and Pinecrest. The sounds of gunfire long faded behind them. Finally, Darion reined in beside a small stream. We should rest the horses, he said, dismounting stiffly, his wounded arm clearly paining him. Zara slid from her saddle and immediately went to examine his injury. It needs cleaning, she declared, before infection sets in. There's a ranch about 2 hours' ride from here, Darion said. Man named Cooper, he'll help us. Us, Zara looked up at him. You're still planning to turn me in, aren't you? For the rustling, Darion's eyes softened. The marshal will want to question you, yes, but I'll vouch that you had no part in the rustling. What happens after that is up to you. And what makes you so sure I wasn't part of it? She challenged, though there was no real heat in her words. Because I've learned to read people, he replied simply. It's how I stayed alive as a ranger, and you, Zara O'Malley, are many things stubborn, fierce, loyal to a fault, but you're no thief. The sincerity in his voice disarmed her. You don't even know me. I'd like to, he said quietly, if you'll let me. Something warm unfurled in Zara's chest, a feeling so foreign she almost didn't recognize it as hope. Why would you want to, after everything that happened today? Darion reached out, his fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. Because when you took off that mask and I saw your eyes in the daylight, I knew I was looking at someone worth knowing, someone brave enough to break free of a lifetime of chains. Zara felt her cheeks flush with heat. No one had ever spoken to her this way with such open admiration. I don't know what happens next, she admitted. I've never been truly on my own before. You're not on your own now, Darion said, his hand dropping back to his side. That is, unless you want to be. She studied him for a long moment, this cowboy who had risked his life for a woman he barely knew, who saw something in her worth saving when her own family had been ready to gun her down in the street. I don't, she said at last, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Want to be alone, that is. The smile that broke across Darion's face was like sunrise after the longest night. Then we'd best get moving before that arm of yours decides to fall off, Zara added, trying to mask her own smile and failing miserably. As they mounted up and continued north, Zara felt lighter than she had in years, despite the uncertainties that lay ahead. For the first time in her life, she was riding towards something rather than away from it. Cooper's ranch turned out to be a modest spread with well-maintained buildings and the distinct feeling of home that Zara had never experienced. The rancher himself was a gruff man in his 50s who took one look at Darion's bloody sleeve and ushered them inside without preamble. Trouble follows you like a shadow, Reed, Cooper remarked as his wife, a kind-faced woman named Martha, tended to Darion's wound. Not intentionally, Darion winced as Martha cleaned the bullet graze. And who might you be, dear? Martha asked Zara, who stood uncertainly by the door. This is Zara, Darion answered before she could speak. She's a friend who needed help. Cooper eyed her skeptically. One of the O'Malleys, I'd wager, by the look of her. Zara stiffened, instinctively searching for an escape route. James, Martha scolded, mind your manners. It's all right, Darion said calmly. Yes, she's an O'Malley by name, but she risked her life today to help me get away from her family. She's not riding with them anymore. Cooper studied Zara for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. Anyone who'd turn against that lot can't be all bad. You hungry, girl? The simple question and the lack of judgment behind it nearly undid Zara. Yes, sir, she managed. Very. While Martha finished bandaging Darion's arm, Cooper showed Zara to the wash basin and gave her a towel. The simple act of washing away the dust and blood of the day felt like a baptism of sorts. When she rejoined the others at the kitchen table, a plate of stew steaming before an empty chair, she felt like a different person. Over dinner, Darion explained what had happened in Pinecrest, though he carefully omitted any suggestion that Zara had been involved in her family's criminal activities. Cooper listened intently, occasionally asking a clarifying question. Marshal Thornton is a good man, he said when Darion had finished. Fair-minded. He'll want to talk to you both, but I don't think he'll hold you accountable for your family's sins, Miss O'Malley. Just Zara, please, she replied. I'm not sure I want to keep the O'Malley name, all things considered. Names are just words, Martha said kindly. It's what's in your heart that matters. After dinner, Martha showed Zara to a small but clean bedroom at the end of the hallway. You get some rest, dear. Things will look brighter in the morning. Left alone, Zara sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. Her family was likely either dead or in custody. Her entire world had been upended in the space of a few hours. And yet, beneath the shock and grief, there was an undeniable sense of freedom, as if she'd been holding her breath for 20 years and had finally been allowed to exhale. A soft knock on the door roused her from her thoughts. Darion stood in the hallway, his arm now properly bandaged and in a sling. I wanted to check on you, he said. It's been a hell of a day. That's one way of putting it, Zara agreed, motioning for him to enter. How's your arm? It'll heal. He leaned against the wall, studying her face. What about you? And don't say you're fine. No one would be after what you've been through. Zara sighed, suddenly too tired to maintain pretenses. I don't know what I am, relieved, terrified, guilty for feeling relieved, all of the above, I suppose. That sounds about right, Darion nodded. For what it's worth, I think you're the bravest person I've met in a long time. Me, Zara laughed incredulously. I spent 20 years doing what I was told, too afraid to leave even though I hated what my family had become. And yet when it mattered, when you had to choose between loyalty to them and doing what was right, you chose right, Darion pointed out. That takes a special kind of courage. His words warmed something inside her that had been cold for too long. What happens tomorrow? She asked. We ride to the county seat, talk to Marshal Thornton after that. He shrugged his good shoulder. That's up to you. Zara hesitated, then asked the question that had been hovering at the edges of her mind. And where will you be after tomorrow? Darion's gaze softened. Wherever you need me to be, Zara, that's a promise. It was such a simple declaration, but it nearly undid her. No one had ever put her needs first before. Why? She whispered. Why would you do that for me? He took a step closer. Because from the moment I saw you by that stream, trying so hard to hide and yet so clearly wanting to be seen, I haven't been able to get you out of my mind. Because when you took off that mask today, even with bullets flying and your life in danger, I saw someone willing to fight for a chance at something better. Another step, bringing him close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. And because I'd like to be part of that something better if you'll let me. Zara didn't remember moving, but suddenly she was in his arms, her face pressed against his chest, his heartbeat strong beneath her ear. His good arm wrapped around her, holding her as if she were something precious. I don't know how to be anything but an O'Malley, she confessed, her words muffled against his shirt. Darion's hand came up to cradle the back of her head. Then I'll help you figure it out one day at a time. They stood like that for a long moment, the simple comfort of human connection washing over Zara like a balm. When she finally pulled back, she saw no pity in Darion's eyes, only understanding and something warmer that made her heart beat faster. You should get some rest, he said, reluctantly stepping away. Tomorrow will come soon enough. As he turned to leave, Zara caught his hand. Thank you, she said, the words wholly inadequate for what she felt. For seeing me. Darion squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "Good night, Zara." After he left, Zara lay in bed staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, her mind replaying the events of the day. She thought of her mother's revelation about her true parentage, of Patrick's willingness to shoot her in the street, of Darion's unwavering support despite everything. Sleep seemed impossible with so many thoughts swirling through her head. Yet sometime in the darkest hours before dawn, exhaustion claimed her, and she slept deeply for the first time in years. She awoke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee wafting from the kitchen. For a disorienting moment, Zara didn't know where she was. The soft bed and clean sheets a far cry from the rough pallet she'd grown accustomed to in the mining settlement. Then yesterday's events came rushing back, and she sat up with a jolt. Her family, the shootout, Darion. Dressing quickly in the same clothes she'd worn the day before, now cleaned and folded at the foot of her bed, courtesy of Martha, Zara made her way to the kitchen. Martha was at the stove, turning bacon in a cast iron skillet, while Cooper and Darion sat at the table reading a newspaper. "Good morning, dear," Martha greeted her warmly. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I expected, thank you," Zara replied, suddenly self-conscious under the gazes of all three. Darion stood, pulling out a chair for her. "Coffee," the simple domestic gesture nearly brought tears to her eyes. "Please." As she settled at the table, Cooper folded the newspaper and pushed it toward her. The headline made her breath catch. "O'Malley gang brought to justice, 3 dead, 2 captured in Pinecrest shootout." With trembling fingers, Zara read the article. Patrick and 2 of his men had been killed in the gunfight with the marshal's deputies. Sean had been captured alive. Along with Zara's heart clenched her mother, who had surrendered without resistance. "I'm sorry," Darion said quietly beside her. Zara stared at the paper, unsure what she was feeling. Grief, relief, both seemed to war within her. "They made their choices," she finally said. "As did I." Cooper cleared his throat. "Marshall's expecting you both in Willow Creek by noon. It's about an hour's ride from here." "I'll get ready," Zara said, pushing back from the table. "Eat first," Martha insisted, placing a plate of eggs and bacon before her. "Can't face the law on an empty stomach." Despite her churning emotions, Zara found herself smiling at Martha's motherly concern, so different from the harsh practicality she'd grown up with. "Yes, madam." After breakfast, they bid farewell to the Coopers, who pressed a bundle of food for the journey into Zara's hands and extracted a promise from Darion to let them know how things turned out. As they rode toward Willow Creek, the county seat, Zara found herself growing increasingly anxious. "What if they don't believe me? What if they think I was part of it all?" "Then I'll set them straight," Darion said firmly. "I was a ranger, remember? My word carries weight. You'd vouch for me, even though you've known me less than a day." Darion guided his horse closer to hers. "I'm a pretty good judge of character, Zara. Had to be in my line of work, and everything I've seen tells me you're someone worth standing up for." His confidence bolstered her own, and by the time they reached the small brick courthouse in Willow Creek, Zara had composed herself. This was her chance to break free from the O'Malley legacy once and for all. She wouldn't waste it. Marshall Thornton proved to be a stern but fair-minded man in his 40s. He listened carefully as Darion recounted the events in Pinecrest, occasionally interjecting with a question. When it came time for Zara to speak, she took a deep breath and told the truth, all of it, from her family's criminal activities to her own desire to escape their way of life. "I never participated in the robberies or rustling," she concluded, "but I knew about them and I didn't stop them." "I understand if that makes me culpable in your eyes." The marshal studied her for a long moment. "Your mother corroborates your story," he said finally. "Says you always fought against the family business. Says that's why your uncle was willing to shoot you in the street." Surprise must have shown on Zara's face because the marshal's expression softened slightly. "She's asking to see you if you're willing." Zara glanced at Darion, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Yes," she said, turning back to the marshal. "I'll see her." The Willow Creek jail was a small, stark building with just 4 cells. Sean occupied one, slumped on a cot with his wounded shoulder bandaged. He didn't look up as they passed. Elizabeth O'Malley sat in the adjacent cell, her back straight, her face composed despite the circumstances. "15 minutes," the deputy said, unlocking the cell door to let Zara enter. For a long moment, mother and daughter simply looked at each other. Elizabeth spoke first. "You look well," she said, as if they were meeting for tea rather than in a jail cell. "I'm alive," Zara replied. "More than can be said for Patrick." "Patrick was a fool," Elizabeth said flatly. "Always was. Your father Cormac kept him in check more or less once Cormac was gone." She shook her head. "Well, you saw what happened. Why did you stay with them after everything?" Elizabeth's gaze drifted to the small barred window. "Fear at first, then habit. It's remarkable what people can get used to, Zara." Her eyes returned to her daughter's face. "But you were always different. You reminded me so much of your real father, his conscience. His stubborn sense of right and wrong." "Who was he?" Zara asked, the question she'd been holding since yesterday's revelation. A small, sad smile curved Elizabeth's lips. "His name was Daniel Harrison, a schoolteacher in the town where I grew up, kind, gentle, everything Cormac wasn't." Her expression hardened. "Cormac found out about us after we were married. He was going to kill Daniel, but I begged him not to. Told him I was carrying Daniel's child, and that if he harmed Daniel, I'd make sure the baby never drew breath." Zara flinched at the brutal calculation behind her mother's words. "Cormac agreed to spare Daniel's life on the condition that we leave immediately and that I never try to contact Daniel again," Elizabeth continued. "And that he would raise you as his own. No one would ever know the truth." "Until now," Zara said quietly. Elizabeth nodded. "Until now, I wanted you to know before." She trailed off, but the implication was clear, before she faced justice for her crimes. "What will happen to you? Judge Stevens is fair but tough on outlaws," Elizabeth replied matter-of-factly. "I expect I'll be looking at a long stretch in the territorial prison. Sean too, if his shoulder doesn't fester." Zara's throat tightened. Despite everything, this was still her mother. "I'm sorry." Elizabeth reached across the small space between them and took Zara's hand, the first gentle touch Zara could remember from her in years. "Don't be. This is where my choices led me, but yours can lead somewhere better." She nodded toward the door where Darion waited outside. "That young man cares for you. I can see it in his eyes." "I hardly know him," Zara protested, though even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. She might not know Darion's history or his favorite food or the names of his childhood friends, but she knew his character, his courage, his compassion, his unwavering sense of right and wrong. "Sometimes that's all it takes," Elizabeth said, releasing her hand. "One moment where you look at someone and know they could change everything." She smiled sadly. "I had that once with Daniel. I made the wrong choice. Don't make mine." The deputy rapped on the bars, signaling their time was up. Zara stood, suddenly aware this might be the last time she saw her mother. "Zara," Elizabeth called as she reached the door. "Your father Daniel, he had a sister in Denver, Ruth Harrison, if you ever want to know more about him, about that side of yourself." Zara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "And one more thing," Elizabeth added. "Be happy, for both of us." Outside the jail, Zara found Darion waiting patiently. One look at her face told him all he needed to know, and without a word, he simply offered his arm. She took it gratefully, leaning into his solid presence as they walked back toward the courthouse. "The marshal says you're free to go," Darion informed her as they walked. "He'll want a formal statement at some point, but he's satisfied you weren't involved in the O'Malley gang's activities." "Where will I go?" Zara wondered aloud, the question suddenly pressing now that the immediate danger had passed. Darion hesitated, then plunged ahead. "I've been thinking about that. I'm foreman at the Double R now, but I've been saving to buy my own place. There's a small ranch coming available just north of here, nothing fancy, but good water and decent grazing." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "I guess what I'm saying is you'd be welcome there if you wanted." Zara stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You're offering me a home, just like that?" "Not just a home," Darion said, his voice soft but steady. "A future. I know it's fast hell. Under normal circumstances, I'd never be this forward, but something tells me you and I could build something good together, Zara. Something honest." "You barely know me," she whispered, echoing her earlier protest to her mother. "I know enough," he replied simply. I know you're strong and brave and that you want more than the life you were born into. The rest we can figure out along the way." He took her hands in his. "I'm not asking for promises, just a chance." Zara looked into his eyes and saw everything her life with the O'Malleys had lacked: honesty, respect, the possibility of real happiness. Taking a deep breath, she made her choice. "Yes," she said, the word carrying the weight of new beginnings. "I'd like that chance." The smile that broke across Darion's face was like sunshine after the longest storm. Acting on impulse, Zara rose on her tiptoes and pressed a soft kiss to his lips. He tensed in surprise for only a moment before his arm came around her waist, drawing her closer as he returned the kiss with gentle fervor. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Darion rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since I saw you by that stream," he admitted. "Even with my face hidden behind a mask," Zara teased. "Especially then," he replied, "because I could still see your eyes, and they told me everything I needed to know." The next several weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Darion returned to his duties at the Double R, where he explained Zara's situation to his employer, Harold Reynolds. To Zara's surprise, Reynolds offered her a position as housekeeper for his family, providing her with both employment and a respectable place to stay, while Darion finalized the purchase of the small ranch he'd mentioned. For Zara, those weeks were a revelation. Working for the Reynolds family with its boisterous children, loving parents, and atmosphere of warmth and mutual respect showed her what family could and should be. She threw herself into her duties, determined to prove her worth beyond the O'Malley name that still occasionally drew whispers when she ventured into town. Her time with Darion, though limited by their respective responsibilities, only confirmed her initial instincts about him. He was indeed kind and honorable, but also stubborn, occasionally impatient, and possessed of a dry wit that never failed to make her laugh. He was, in short, human, not the flawless hero she might have cast him as in the aftermath of their dramatic meeting, but something far better. A good man doing his best with room in his heart for her. On a crisp autumn evening, with the first hints of winter sharpening the air, Darion took Zara to see the ranch he'd purchased. The main house was modest but solid, with a wide porch and a view of the rolling grasslands stretching to distant mountains. "It needs work," he admitted as they stood on that porch, his arm around her shoulders. "The barn roof leaks and the corral fence won't make it through winter without repairs, but the land is good. We could build something here." Zara leaned into his embrace, savoring the quiet satisfaction in his voice. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. After a lifetime of hiding, the openness of the land with its endless horizons and abundant light felt like freedom incarnate. "There's something else," Darion said, his tone shifting to something more serious. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I know it hasn't been long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "Zara, will you marry me? Help me build this place into a home." Tears sprang to Zara's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes." Darion surged to his feet, lifting her off the ground and spinning her in a circle that pulled laughter from her throat. When he set her down, his lips found hers in a kiss that promised all the tomorrows they would share. They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the Reynolds ranch house. Martha and James Cooper attended, as did Harold Reynolds and his family, and a few of Darion's friends from his ranger days. Zara had no one to give her away, a fact that might have saddened her had Martha not taken her aside the morning of the wedding. "I know we haven't known each other long," the older woman said, pressing a small package into Zara's hands. "But James and I never had a daughter, and well, we've grown quite fond of you, dear." Inside the package was a delicate silver locket. When Zara opened it, she found a tiny scrap of paper with unfamiliar handwriting. "For my daughter on her wedding day, love endures. Your mother gave it to me when we visited her last week," Martha explained gently. "Said it was the one thing of value she had left and that she wanted you to have it today." Fresh tears welled in Zara's eyes. "I didn't know you'd gone to see her." "It was James's idea, actually, he thought." Martha paused, choosing her words carefully. He thought you might like to know that she truly wishes for your happiness, even if she can't be here to see it. The kindness of the gesture, both her mother's and the Coopers, nearly undid Zara. Would you walk with me?" she asked Martha, "when it's time." Martha's eyes glistened with unshed tears of her own. "It would be my honor, dear." And so it was that Zara walked toward her future on the arm of a woman who had shown her more maternal care in a few weeks than Elizabeth O'Malley had in years. Yet as she moved toward Darion, handsome and nervous in his best suit, Zara found herself saying a silent thank you to her mother as well for the gift of the locket. Yes, but also for the final, belated gift of truth that had set her free. "You're beautiful," Darion whispered as she reached him, his eyes shining with a love that still amazed her. "So are you," she replied, meaning it down to her bones. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises of love and loyalty exchanged under the vast Montana sky. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Darion kissed her with such tenderness that Zara felt it like a benediction, washing away the last shadows of her past. The celebration afterward was joyous good food, music from a fiddle player Reynolds had hired as a wedding gift, and more laughter than Zara had experienced in her entire life combined. As evening fell, guests began to depart, until only the newlyweds remained standing on the porch of the Reynolds house under a sky ablaze with stars. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Reed?" Darion asked, his arm warm around her waist. Home. The word had never held such promise. "I've been ready my whole life," Zara replied, leaning into his embrace. "I just didn't know it until now." They rode to their ranch in companionable silence, the world around them silver-washed in moonlight. Darion had spent every spare moment of the past 2 weeks preparing the house, and when they arrived, Zara found the porch railing festooned with lanterns, casting a warm glow over the threshold. Before she could dismount, Darion was there, lifting her from the saddle with strong, sure hands. "Welcome home," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Zara wrapped her arms around his neck. "Carry me inside, husband." With a smile that set her heart racing, Darion swept her into his arms and carried her across the threshold into their new life together. The following morning, Zara woke just before dawn, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then she felt Darion's arm draped across her waist, heard his steady breathing beside her, and remembered. This was home now. He was home. Carefully, so as not to wake him, she slipped from beneath the covers and padded to the window. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, a faint blush of pink on the horizon promising the sun's imminent arrival. On impulse, Zara pulled on her robe and stepped outside onto the porch. The air was crisp with autumn chill, but she barely noticed, transfixed by the gradual illumination of the landscape before her. This land, their land, emerging from darkness into light. She didn't hear Darion approach until his arms encircled her from behind, his body warm against the morning coolness. "You're up early," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I didn't want to miss it," she replied, leaning back into his embrace. "Miss what?" Zara gestured toward the horizon, where the first sliver of sun was breaching the distant mountains. "This. The beginning." Darion turned her gently in his arms until she faced him, the rising sun now behind her. "Do you know," he said, lifting a hand to brush a strand of hair from her face, "when I first saw you by that stream, hiding behind that boulder, all I wanted was to see your face in the sunlight." "And now?" Zara asked, raising her eyes to his. His smile was tender as he turned her again, positioning them side by side to watch as the sun cleared the mountains, bathing their land in golden light. "Now I want to see your face in every light morning, noon, and night for the rest of our lives." As the sun rose higher, its warmth touching her skin, Zara felt the last vestiges of her old life, the fear, the hiding, the shame melt away like morning mist. Her family had hidden their faces from the world, wrapped in darkness of their own making. But Darion had shown her what it meant to live in the light, to face each day with hope rather than dread. "I love you," she said, the words still new enough on her tongue to feel like a revelation. Darion's arm tightened around her waist. "And I love you, Zara Reed, always will." Together, they watched the sun climb into the clear Montana sky. its light transforming the land before them into a tapestry of gold and amber. And in that moment, bathed in the glory of a new day, Zara knew with bone-deep certainty that she had finally found her place in the world, not hiding in shadows, but standing proudly in the light, her face turned toward the rising sun. In the years that followed, the Reed Ranch flourished under Darion and Zara's care. What began as a modest homestead expanded gradually as they acquired adjacent parcels of land, built a larger barn, and eventually added rooms to the house as their family grew. Their first child, a daughter named Emma Ruth Reed, arrived almost exactly a year after their wedding. Zara had never imagined the fierce, all-encompassing love she felt for the tiny being placed in her arms after hours of labor. As she looked down at her daughter's face, so perfect, so trusting, she silently vowed that Emma would know only love and security, never the fear and uncertainty that had marked Zara's own childhood. Darion proved to be a devoted father, as patient and gentle with Emma as he was passionate and steadfast with Zara. Watching him rock their daughter to sleep, his deep voice softly humming lullabies, Zara often found herself overwhelmed with gratitude for the life they were building together. When Emma was 3, Zara received a letter from the territorial prison where her mother was serving her sentence. Elizabeth wrote that she was ill consumption, the prison doctor said, and didn't expect to see another winter. She asked for nothing, merely wanted to tell Zara that she thought of her often and hoped she was happy. After a sleepless night of contemplation, Zara made the journey to see her mother one last time. The woman who greeted her in the prison infirmary was a shadow of the strong, hard-edged Elizabeth O'Malley she remembered. Thin to the point of gauntness, her once vibrant auburn hair now streaked with gray, Elizabeth nonetheless smiled when Zara entered. "You came," she said, her voice a raspy whisper. "I came," Zara confirmed, taking a seat beside the narrow bed. They talked for hours, really talked, perhaps for the first time in their lives. Elizabeth asked about Darion, about Emma, about the ranch. She listened intently as Zara described her life, occasionally closing her eyes as if to better picture the scenes Zara painted with her words. "I'm glad," Elizabeth said finally. "Glad you found your way to happiness despite everything." "I've been thinking about what you told me," Zara said. "About my real father," she hesitated, then plunged ahead. "I wrote to his sister in Denver, Ruth." Elizabeth's eyes widened slightly. "Did she write back?" Zara nodded. "She did. She told me about him, about the kind of man he was, how he never married after you left. How he kept teaching until his heart gave out 5 years ago." She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small daguerreotype. "She sent me this. She thought I might want to see his face." With trembling fingers, Elizabeth took the image. A man in his early 30s stared back from the photograph, his serious expression belied by kind eyes that even the formal pose couldn't diminish. "He looks like Emma around the eyes," Elizabeth observed softly, tracing the outline of his face with one thin finger. "You have his smile, though." She handed the image back to Zara. "Thank you for letting me see him one more time." As Zara prepared to leave, Elizabeth reached for her hand. "I know I wasn't the mother you deserved," she said, her voice stronger than it had been all day. "But I want you to know I'm proud of the woman you've become, so proud." Tears stung Zara's eyes as she squeezed her mother's frail hand. "I forgive you," she said, the words rising from some deep, healing place within her, "for all of it." Elizabeth's smile was tremulous but genuine. "Be happy, my darling girl, and remember you were loved. Always." Elizabeth O'Malley died 3 weeks later. Zara received the news with a complex mixture of grief and relief. Grief for the relationship they might have had under different circumstances, relief that her mother's suffering was over. At Zara's insistence, they buried Elizabeth in the small cemetery on their ranch, beneath a cottonwood tree that offered dappled shade in summer and a riot of golden leaves in autumn. The simple headstone read, "Elizabeth Harrison O'Malley, beloved mother, at peace." Life moved forward, as it inevitably does. The Reeds welcomed 2 more children over the years: Daniel James, named for Zara's biological father, and James Cooper, who had become a surrogate father to Zara, and Michael Darion, who arrived unexpectedly when Emma was 12, a final blessing to complete their family. The ranch prospered as Darion's innovative breeding programs and Zara's careful management of their finances allowed them to weather the inevitable hard years that came with ranching life. Their reputation for fairness and honesty spread throughout the territory, a point of particular pride for Zara, who had once believed the O'Malley name would forever be associated with deceit and criminality. Through it all, the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and challenges, Darion remained the solid center of Zara's world. Their love deepened with the passing years, transformed from the heady rush of their early days to something more profound. A partnership of equals, built on mutual respect, unwavering trust, and an enduring passion that time only seemed to strengthen. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Darion surprised Zara with a special gift. He led her, blindfolded, from their house to a spot on a nearby hilltop just before dawn. "Can I look now?" she asked, anticipation building as he positioned her carefully. "Not yet," he replied, his voice warm with amusement. "Just a moment more." She felt him move behind her, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. "Now," he whispered, untying the blindfold. As the cloth fell away, Zara gasped. Before her stood a small stone bench beneath a newly planted tree. The bench bore a simple inscription, "For Zara, who taught me to see beauty in all light." "Do you like it?" Darion asked, a touch of nervousness in his voice. Zara turned to face him, this man who had changed her life in ways she was still discovering 2 decades later. His hair now bore strands of silver at the temples, and fine lines fanned from the corners of his eyes, evidence of a life lived fully with all its laughter and sorrows. To Zara, he had never been more handsome. "I love it," she assured him, rising on tiptoe to press a kiss to his lips. "And I love you, Darion Reed, more today than yesterday and less than tomorrow." He smiled, the same smile that had captured her heart all those years ago. "That works out well," he said, pulling her close, "because I plan to keep loving you for all our tomorrows." As they sat together on the bench, watching the sun rise over the land they had nurtured and the home they had built, Zara reflected on the long, unlikely journey that had brought her to this moment. From a frightened girl hiding behind a mask to a woman who faced each day with confidence and joy, the transformation seemed nothing short of miraculous. Yet it wasn't a miracle, she knew. It was a choice, the choice to step into the light, to embrace love over fear, truth over deception. A choice she had made that fateful day in Pinecrest, and one she continued to make every morning when she opened her eyes to a new day. Her family had hidden their faces from the world, shrouding themselves in darkness of their own making. But Darion had shown her the courage to stand in the full light of day, to face the rising sun with hope rather than dread. And in that light, she had found not just love, but herself, the woman she was always meant to be. As the sun cleared the horizon, bathing them in golden warmth, Darion took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture as familiar as breathing. "Happy anniversary, my love," he said softly. Zara leaned into his embrace, content in a way her younger self could never have imagined possible. "Happy anniversary," she replied, turning her face toward the light. "Here's to all the sunrises yet to come."